All right. We're going to finish up our last session of the impact track today with, I gotta say, probably the icing on the cake. I don't know what they're doing over there just because it says C-suite in the title. Like, what's that about? Like, whatever. So we have Ian O'Keefe with us today. He is the founder and CEO of Ikona Analytics, and he's going to talk to us about how to leverage Gen AI to assess your data capabilities inside your own organizations, all in pursuit of helping unlock the potential that is there within our people data that we're not capitalizing on. And then I am supposed to tell, Ian and I go way back. Ian, I actually did my dissertation at Sears, where Ian was the head of talent analytics. So he's watched me grow, I've watched him grow, and I'm just very excited to be able to introduce him today. So please join hands in welcoming Ian.
Afternoon. Afternoon. All right. That's it. I have the post-lunch low sugar session here, so. Yeah, great to be here. This is actually my first in-person People Analytics World Conference. I did some virtual stuff during the pandemic, but incredible to be here and incredible to see faces, familiar, some are new. Some of you know me from companies that I've led People Analytics at. And now I'm doing something a little different. I started Ikona Analytics earlier this year, and we're a People Analytics consultancy. We help PA teams build, scale, and basically drive more impact with your people analytics. And fortunate to be hooked up with a couple amazing organizations, one of which is the A Team. It's the logo on the left. They're a fractional builder platform. They have data scientists, software engineers, PMs, as well as Sempervirens. The Pine Tree logo is a venture capital fund that focuses in workforce tech, and I'm fortunate to advise some of the founders there as well. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't call out the amazing partners, the data and platform providers that we go to market with. One Model Vizier, Groove is here, and I'll touch on Atlas a little bit later in the presentation. But if you're not familiar, Atlas is the co-pilot born out of the HR Leaders podcast, which is a pretty incredible product to check out when you have a moment. So as I've kind of evolved in my journey and decided to jump into Ikona, I've been reflecting on the challenges that a lot of PA teams have, that I've had in the past, that peers of mine have had, and it's hard to land on one. So as I was prepping for this, I kind of reflected and got to this partially completed sentence, which I want you to play a little game with me. How would you complete this sentence? HR data ecosystems are challenging due to issues with data. Availability. Everything. Quality. Privacy. Quality. What else? Skills. Consistency. Who struggles with one of these? 2, 3, all, at least one, right? You get the point. This job is hard for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that HR data ecosystems have not been created with intentional data strategy for curated analytics to drive insights that are actionable. Different parts of the service delivery model pop up in different ways, supporting tech in different kind of forms and fashions. And so the question in my mind then becomes, with all these challenges in mind, how do you assess and align across the ecosystem? How do you assess capabilities throughout the entire service delivery model? And in doing so, how do you get HR stakeholders, and I'm not just talking about tech, ops, compliance, legal, but program and process owners, talent acquisition, comp, learning, leadership, HR ops, the data producing programs and processes that exist in HR that are data producing, but whose owners probably wouldn't automatically raise their hand and say, I have a key role in driving data quality and data consistency throughout the ecosystem to make your job easier. Does anybody have partners that say that? Michael's sort of raising her hand. Yeah. So this is the opportunity and the challenge that we have. And in my mind, the pathway to getting to a good response to this question is in these 4 buckets that I would call the 4 pillars of people analytics. And in my experience, again, at the orgs I've been at and the orgs that I've benchmarked off of and talked to on a peer basis over the many years, the best teams in the world have learned and account for all the capabilities that are in these 4 buckets. You might not own all of them or directly manage all of them, but you have an awareness of what governance means, what infrastructure, methods, products mean, and how you operationalize that in your people analytics program. Whether you've built all of it, probably not. Whether you've built and bought, maybe you borrow some of this from other parts of the org. In the case of governance, for instance, this refers to, I would define this as programmatic mechanisms and tools to define, acquire, and ethically manage access to data in ways that are intentionally designed on principles, safeguard employee trust and privacy, manage risk, and promote high-velocity decision-making. That's a lot. You break that down, there's 7 key capabilities here. The strategy and management across the organization. Do you have a data strategy or not? Generation and acquisition of data. How is data from processes and programs generated and then systematically acquired? Is it codified in an interface, or is it living on a spreadsheet off the side of someone's desk and you call it a process? Succession planning come to mind? Anybody have that problem, right? Definitional inconsistency. How does finance count bodies? How do we count bodies? Quality of data that's affected by inconsistent generation and acquisition that might be misrepresented in a catalog. Do you have an ethics perspective and a charter on how you use data responsibly? And then privacy, compliance, legal. All component parts of governance that usually don't exist in isolation in a PA team. You're usually looking to other parts of the org to build mechanisms, partnerships, and borrow expertise to stand up your governance program. Infrastructure, how data is stored, how you manage storage and compute, the pipelines, whether or not you have scalability and kind of performant infrastructure that you have quality, security, control, permissions on. And then importantly, how analytically curated your data is for things like basic trending, analysis, predictions. So is your infrastructure posture one that's just capturing data transactionally, or is it one that's geared for analytics and insights and science? Methods, this should be very familiar to everyone here in the room. This is usually where people analytics practitioners and teams grew up, so to speak. But we define this as the methods that you use to analyze data and create new and exciting discoveries. We call them insights that are actionable and that you can tie back into operational workflows in the organization. So basic things like querying up to more advanced things like ML and AI and now Gen AI. And then lastly, products. So how you ship an insight to a customer matters a lot. A flash report on Monday morning over email is a product. It's not a terrific product, but it's a product. A report is a product, a dashboard's a product. A prediction that is pushed into production and production integrated into a software application in a smartly designed UX and UI is obviously a product. And you might buy a product. You might buy a software product. So how you productize insights to customers to act is what we refer to as the product set and what I refer to as productization of insights and people analytics. So there's 31 capabilities that we just whizzed through here. That's a lot, right? It's more than a lot when you look at these capabilities arrayed against the service delivery model. So my thesis is that the way that HR conducts business is through processes and programs that are usually nested in domains. There's 6 of them that we account for. Your org might have some, but not all, of these processes and domains. They might organize them differently. But as we run through the list, HR strategy, having HRBP advisory work, PMO change, OE, comms, DEI. From left to right, this will follow the employee service delivery lifecycle. So talent acquisition would include outputs from finance related to headcount planning, candidate sourcing, applicant tracking, assessment and selection, offer management, onboarding. These are processes. Some of them are codified in systems. Some of them are not. Some of them are tribal knowledge that exists amongst your recruiters that might be captured in spreadsheets and just talking within their networks. Total rewards. Comp related to salary, Ben, payroll, recognition, reload, travel and expense. Recognition's one that I find interesting. It's often a soft program. There might be budget tied to it. Rarely is the effectiveness of it looked at. Rarely is the data organized and curated for analytics. Should it be? Maybe not. But if you don't have a perspective on where you stand in any of these areas, I think you're at a disadvantage. The next would be talent management, things like year-end review, feedback, goal setting, coaching, listening, performance management. Talent development, leadership, learning, movement, retention, promotion, succession planning, and then lastly, HR ops. So we could debate the fine points here, but from left to right, does this look like an HR organizational model, service delivery model? Yeah? Top to bottom, the capabilities you need to be analytically mature. Some of these capabilities that we saw a few minutes ago are simpler, some of them are more complex, but having this view creates what I would call the HR data ecosystem. 30 by 35, over 1,000 points of inspection in the ecosystem. And I've experienced it to be challenging when you step into a PA role and when you're thinking about the next steps for your program. Where do you start? Where are we strong? Where are we weak? What should I build, buy, borrow? What should I lean into? And what are the trade-offs as I make those decisions? And should I concede my roadmap to someone in one of these areas who's waving their hands, screaming wildly, or who has more influence than others? It's challenging. So a way to look at the ecosystem quantifiably, objectively, and apples to apples is what we're going for here. So when you do that, you start to see some interesting patterns. So this is a client example that's been scrubbed and redacted a bit, but you could see domains where the common accepted knowledge might be we have strength in this pillar. Things are okay. But when you dig deeper and unpack it a bit, you might find concentrated areas of insufficiency when it comes to one particular pillar, in this case, the methods that comp is using to analyze data. Or you could look at it horizontally, infrastructure that you have in place across the org. Overall strong. We have a good foundation here. But there are some glaring omissions in specific processes in each domain, most of which are housed in HR strategy in this example. The processes that you have that are in good shape, that are very strong across the board, might have neighbors right next door that are weak and wanting for any kind of analytic capability, starting with your foundational and moving up the list. And then when you think about moving up the ladder from crawl to walk or walk to run, we've heard a lot over the course of the last couple of days about having a strong foundation. I would argue there are capabilities in each pillar, in each horizontal segment that you must have to have a strong foundation. If you don't have a data strategy, you don't have consistent storage and compute patterns, you're not querying and doing basic trend analysis and productizing that to the most basic extent, you don't have a strong foundation. So if you do have a strong foundation and you want to level up and get more predictive, what are your starting points? This isn't a very good picture. I'd love to see more blue here. But where you're red, those are your opportunity spots to level up and get more predictive off of your solid foundation. Bless you. And then overall, to wrap it up, I think you get the point. But if you think about having a conversation with the heads of the functions listed across the top and the SMEs of the functions listed down the side, and you're in a business review with them, and you have to say where we're strong and where we're weak and what we should do about it. That's a hard conversation without a blueprint, I would say, to have that conversation with. So if you know where you're strong, very specifically, and where you're weak, very specifically, you have an overall view of what the ecosystem looks like. Now, I've just walked through a bunch of scenarios. There's colored cells on a page. It's like, so what, right? How you get to this is what I want to describe next. And so the heat map comes with some click-ins. And every single cell on this page, the color comes also with a score. And behind every cell, color, and score, we assess the existence and the maturity of a data capability. And we also have a scoring rubric where we quantify that. And behind every cell is a word model. And I'll get to that in a minute. But when you quantify very discrete intersections, you can roll them up into aggregate views that give you insight that you didn't have before. In this example, we use anomaly detection to spot where you should focus your energies earlier than later, sooner than later. It's not always the lowest score that gets the attention. There are dependencies between capabilities that will affect other instances downstream. If you have terrible consistency in the way that you capture and acquire certain data through transactional inconsistency, it's going to affect quality. That's going to land in your pipes and your curated layers poorly. Your reports are going to be messed up, and then your poor reporting analyst is going to hear about it from a business leader. The common refrain would be, we need to fix reporting. You don't need to fix reporting. You need to go back upstream through your queries into the tech stack, and at the root of it, you might find that there's inconsistency in how, real example, any recruiters in the room? I apologize in advance. No? Recruiters like to leave pooling requisitions open all year long because it's a lot easier to keep it open than to close it. And then when that hits your layers of infrastructure and lands in reports, you wonder why you have time values that make no sense. This role's been open for 2,000 days. It's ridiculous, right? So these little kind of thorns in your side, they add up, and they take time away from you doing other more meaningful things. So if you can quantify and assess, the way to do that is also a way to align people towards what's true across the ecosystem in a way that's apples to apples. So I'll pivot to how we get to this. So we get to this called something that I like to call the People Analytics HR Assessment, or a PARA. It's a consultative process. It's 5 steps, typically over 10 to 12 weeks. In discovery, what we do is we ingest documentation, not employee data. I repeat, not employee data, no PII involved. We look at documents and artifacts that you have, probably scattered all over the place in different SharePoints and drives, SOPs, guidelines, ethics charter, training materials, technical design docs, process flows. Show us evidence that the way that you manage, store, analyze, productize data, show me evidence of that. And then also what we do is we talk to your SMEs and your process and program owners. We codify their experiences with how their processes work. How do you get data back in an insightful way? What do you do with it? We key in on each of those capabilities in structured conversations with prompts, I would say. Prompts that we use not just to structure interviews and focus groups, but prompts that we also use to guide LLMs to crank and analyze and give us summaries. I'll demystify that in a minute. So discovery is really about collecting information. A single one-on-one with an SME with our structured prompts would create an hour-long conversation that's 10 pages of single-space transcript material. We have 2 to 3 dozen of those conversations, plus another couple, maybe 100 pages of reference material that we ingest. So cranking through 400, 500, 600 pages of information is hard to do without machines. So we use machines to do this. During synthesis, what we do is we create word models out of each cell in the intersection, right? The matrix that we just saw, every one of them has a word model behind it. Then we combine those summaries into larger summaries, and off we go. So the word models are based on an approach we have where we put a RAG architecture in place, and we guide LLMs to inspect on specific prompts through the RAG based on the documentation that we've gathered and that we've created by talking to your SMEs about their experiences. So it's very guardrailed and guided, and then we also have some NLU that we use, and we also cross-reference a client's ecosystem with external documentation that we have that's out there in the public domain. A lot of people in this room have had amazing perspective on many parts of the ecosystem, and that's inspiration for us to cross-reference and analyze against. And you can do that with some speed and scale by using machines. Then we create the assessment. So like I said, the assessment starts with small summaries that are fact-checked. And then we have a scoring rubric that creates the actual percentages. And we keep humans in the loop. This is important. So this is not a data ingestion, machine-driven only process. It's human-led and AI-assisted, right? So the owners of the data, the program and process leads that were listed across the top, and the SMEs that are involved in your technical stack, that are involved in your governance layers, we're talking to them. We're involving them in the process, and by having these conversations, we're shining a light on their spot in the ecosystem, and without saying it in these words, their accountability for certain aspects of the ecosystem. That might be old hat to your HR tech lead. It might be old hat to, obviously, you all. This would make a lot of sense. But how about your head of recruiting, or your head of comp, or your HRBPs for that matter? Do they have a role in managing and maintaining and increasing the analytic literacy and the data capability of the entire organization, or are they just passive consumers of data that they expect to come magically to them? Anybody have an opinion on that? I think they have a role. I think that the matrix that I showed a few minutes ago it's incomplete. And it's incomplete because a lot of what HR does within the ecosystem is not digitized and captured vis-a-vis data. So you might say, Ian, the HRBP advisory column that you had, what are the processes that HRBPs have that generate data? There are a lot, actually. Their day-to-day is massively data generating. Whether or not we capture that with collaboration metadata, Bridie could probably relate to that. Like, there's ways we can capture data that we don't. So part of it is really to shine a light on, if you're bright red in something, why is that? Is that intentional or is that accidental? Is that by design or by just omission, right? So by scoring it and then putting a value to it, you have a benchmark to work off of. And then you're gut checking that with the people who are living those parts of the ecosystem day to day by having humans in the loop. How the picture is starting to form is what we like to cross-reference with SMEs through follow-up conversations and then ultimately in a workshop format. It's intimidating, I think, to come to an HR org and say, we're using LLMs and AI to assess your ecosystem and throw a bunch of jargon at them. If you say to them, we're using machines to go faster and crank a lot of information, and we're going to workshop you guys. We're going to show you how the picture is shaping up. We're going to see where you're strong, where you're weak, and what you should do next. We're going to have an opinion on, but we're going to workshop that together. We're going to create that together. But we're going to be on the same page as we do that. So when you create small summaries of language and roll it up to the larger summaries, then you score it, you can start to see patterns like we saw a few minutes ago. And then you can start to highlight gaps and then bounce those gaps off of the SMEs that are in the ecosystem. And then lastly, we're iterating constantly as we do this, and we're feeding it back into the engine and the kind of narrative curation of what ultimately results in time-bound recommendations, which again are not just spit out by a machine. We write that down on paper, we bounce that off SMEs, and then we're making recommendations based on where you're strong, where you're maybe limping along but improving, or where you're weak, what you should consider to build, and in what order, or buy, or bot, or borrow. So the practical application of this, it kind of comes down to 4 things that you get. One is a apples-to-apples comparison of those capabilities in the 4 pillars against your service delivery model. And that's a snapshot. It's like an MRI, an X-ray of where you are at a given point in time. And as you see that, let's call it October of 2024, you'll go down some paths of decision-making to activate work streams, to improve on certain things. Where will you be in 6 months or 8 months or a year? What investments will you have made to improve certain things in the ecosystem? There's time and energy associated with that. If you're going from X% to Y% over Z amount of time, that's the boilerplate recipe for an ROI, for a business case that you can make and bring back with some defensibility to, say, finance on why we did this, how we improved, what it means for our services and products, right? So that's your raw material. Secondly, as we create these word models and as we create the narrative, we're, again, cross-referencing against some of the best practices that we know of out there in the world. And that's something that is highlighted, especially in areas where you might show up weak, and those weaknesses are creating downstream insufficiencies and dependencies that are preventing you from getting to next, so to speak. Industry benchmarks. This is inspired by David Green. He touched on a few, actually earlier yesterday, about the Insight 222 research study, right? ABCD teams. There's characteristics of those teams. There's a natural tendency to wonder if we're doing all this work, like where do we stand vis-a-vis competitors? Where do we stand in our industry? How are we doing when I zoom out of the org and look at the industry? We'll give a read on that. And then lastly, for each of the 4 pillars and specific capabilities where you're showing up weak, there's time-bound recommendations, again, of what you should consider to build, buy, borrow, or automate. And this is where the partners that I had up on the screen a few minutes ago come into play. So I had a client not long ago. I don't know if anyone from One Model is in the room, but one of our clients, they were partially centralized with their data infrastructure. A lot of data was not landing centrally, and the head of tech actually said to me, if we only had like a single data model, like one model, I said this out loud, and I was like, I said, okay, I know someone. We can solve that. There are instances where you might have needs that are, we can quickly prototype something and give you a sense of what it would mean to solve that. If you need to create a unified, orchestrated data layer, that's where you call in partners. So there's an amazing amount of capability in the vendor marketplace of what to level up and buy now than there was 5 years ago, definitely 10 years ago. So this is where I think it's important to have informed decision-making on what you're already good at or starting to get good at that you want to continue to build on versus buying. If you're bright red on something, you might get pressure to build, but you might be faster and you might have a better case to take to your stakeholders in finance by buying something that's already been proven in the marketplace. Or borrowing capability from parts of the org that you just didn't know existed. You didn't know that the central tech team had data scientists squirreled away building something that you could actually lean into and borrow. So these are the kinds of nooks and crannies that we get into and we tease out. And then I missed one thing. So as we do this, we're generating a lot of content. This is unstructured data, it's text, it's docs, it's messy. We structure it and we use LLMs and word models to do that like I've talked about, but while we're engaged, we also make that content available to stakeholders and to anyone involved in the project through the Atlas Copilot. So this would be a white labeled instance to your org, and you get a knowledge vault that you can then interact with. This is Atlas and not mine, but basically it's a way into understanding the kind of intelligence that you can expect, questions that you can get answered in a format that's very unobtrusive and kind of easy to use. And also you're not signing up for, a Gen AI commitment that is irreversible. Once you have this, if you want to keep it, that's a conversation that we would gladly hand off to Atlas. The way I like to think about this is it's maybe a junior level chief data analytics officer. It's got the content and the SOPs and the policy and the perspectives of all of your SMEs in a way that's going to be interesting to interact with as they go about, they being your stakeholders and SMEs, they go about their day jobs. So that's an interesting twist on this. We're kind of continuously taking feedback and iterating on the offering, figuring out how to plug in partners in ways that are creative and ideally just valuable to you all. And yeah, if you have questions, I hope I have answers. And otherwise, thanks for listening to me to turn 4 hours of content into 35 minutes. So thank you.
I think we got like 1 minute. I'm going to ask a question because, again, I think sometimes I'm really good at kind of how many of us in this room struggle with getting people to even think that people analytics is worth an investment in the first place, right? Okay, all right. Well, then that's why I'm now at a new company. How are you? Do you see any? Instead of calling this you still do it this way, but it's people analytics. Well, really, what you're doing is fixing HR to an extent, right? So, how are you pitching this, right? I'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You can hear me. It's a great question, and honestly, Michael, I struggle a little bit with. I've called it 5 different things over as many different months. The entry point, I think people analytics is uniquely positioned to have perspective and ownership and to do something meaningful in that ecosystem. Like, whose is it? It's HR's, but like the head of HR is not going to drive that. So who is it? People analytics, I think, is a great owner, right? But people analytics, some of you might have picked up, it's nowhere on the grid.
Yeah.
You don't have a people analytics team. People analytics capability is up and down the stack. And yes, it's organized into HR, but yeah, I probably should be a little bit more bullish with people analytics could and should be the rightful owner of the health of the ecosystem and creates new mechanisms across all of those areas to drive continuous improvement. So if anybody has ideas on how to create that and what to call that, it's probably not a people analytics assessment. It's a HR data capabilities assessment, DACA.
No.
Let's whiteboard, but your question is spot on, and it's really kind of hitting a theme that I think we've talked a little bit about over the course of the last couple of days. Where does people analytics go next? Does it stay where it is? Does it take on more? Does it influence more? I think it does influence more. I think it should. I think it's uniquely positioned to do this, and so the next time you see this, it'll be called something else, probably. Thank you, Michael. I'll give you credit for that one.
All right, cool. All right, thanks, everyone. Thank you, Ian.